Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Reardon, president of Monontoc Audubon Society, and welcome to this evening's community program, Saltmarsh Restoration. Monontoc wishes to honor the indigenous communities native to the chapter area, including Pecosset, Wepawag, Quinnipiac, Tuttacket, Monontoc, and Hammonasset people. As we advocate for the conservation of land and its wildlife, we're indebted to the work of the native and indigenous people who cherished the land for thousands of years before European colonization. Couple of announcements here. First, Urbanscapes Native Plant Nursery will be opening on Saturday, 9:30. On Sunday, we'll be in Guilford on the Green at Earth Day from 1 to 4. Next week, Joyce Sorigliano from the Theodore Roosevelt Sanctuary on Long Island will be talking about native plants in This Place is for the Birds. And then on May 14th, Katie Fallon will be talking to us about vultures, the private life of an unloved bird. You can sign up for all of those on the website. Corrie Folsom-O'Keefe is the Director of Bird Conservation for Audubon Connecticut, the state office of National Audubon Society. In this position, she oversees Audubon's on-the-ground coastal stewardship and resiliency efforts. Corrie leads the Audubon Alliance for Coastal Water Birds, which assists Connecticut Deep with their management of piping plovers and other beach nesting birds. She also co-leads the Wildlife Guards and Saltmarsh Steward programs, which educate, mentors, and employs Bridgeport, West Haven, and Stratford high school students as coastal bird stewards. In her spare time, she flies airplanes, and she plays mandolin in bluegrass band, Sperry Creek. Corrie, welcome to this evening's program. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Dennis. Should I go ahead and share my screen?
Go ahead and share your screen. And people, if you have questions, put them in the comments, the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. Thanks.
Okay, good. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
Finally was able to find the right button. So, okay. Well, welcome everybody. And Dennis, thank you for the introduction. I know that that's a handful to read that introduction. I really have to figure out a way to simplify it. But I'm excited to be here tonight to share with you all a bit about salt marshes, their value to wildlife and to people, and what we are doing to restore and enhance salt marshes. And I'm going to kind of give some examples of strategies, and then I'll give examples of projects right here in Connecticut where we collectively, I'm going to say, because it's not just Audubon, there's a lot of partners involved in this work, are working to make sure our marshes are resilient and will be here into the future. But before I jump into that, I do like to start by just telling everybody a little bit about myself and how I got into bird conservation. It was some people think those who are working in conservation were born obsessed with birds, and that wasn't necessarily the case for me. But there were definitely some steps along the way that helped me get into bird conservation. And I'll start with my parents. That picture in the left-hand corner is my dad and my mom and me and my brother when we were, maybe 3 and maybe 2 and not quite 1 year old, younger than that. But my parents were very outdoorsy, and I just think that me getting into conservation probably wouldn't have happened if my mom didn't have a couple of bird feeders in the backyard and did a lot of gardening, and if my dad didn't take me and my brother and sister on hikes and point out hawks and things like that on the side of the highway. So even as a young child, even though I wasn't obsessed with birds, I was observant. I was aware of wildlife, and I got to sort of, see nature and observe it. And I think that made a difference. Fast forward to when I was a senior in college, I went to Boston University for my undergrad, and I was studying marine biology at the time. And my senior year, my last semester, my friend Lane, who is on the bottom left picture here, she asked me if I wanted to go on a bird walk with the Brookline Bird Club in the Boston Commons. And I was like, yeah, why not? I'll do that. And so we went on a walk, and on that walk, I saw a Blackburnian warbler. And up until that point, I knew about cardinals and blue jays and tufted titmices, but nobody had told me about warblers. And I was smitten. I was just suddenly like, I think I pulled out a Peterson guide or some sort of, Nat Geo, and I was just suddenly like, wait, there's this whole warbler section. And, I was kind of surprised that I never noticed these amazingly colorful, beautiful birds before. So, and I will say I also just got back from a trip. Me and Lane, still good friends. We went to Costa Rica a few weeks ago and saw about 150 different bird species, every color of the rainbow. It was amazing. So, but she definitely sort of inspired me to get more interested in birds. And then top right picture is of the Farallon Islands. And when I was about 24, I was out in California working for the Mona Lake Committee, which is in the Sierra Nevadas. And somebody I was working with was telling me about the Farallon Islands, this crazy island off the coast of San Francisco, where there's great white sharks swimming around the island. And he's, I was like, wow, that would be so awesome. I'd love to go there. And he said, well, I'll see what I can do. And he sent an email, and sure enough, the people out on the island emailed me and said, yeah, you want to come volunteer? And I said, yes. And so I got to go spend 5 weeks out on the Farallon Islands. And yes, I got to see great white sharks. And I was in a boat that wasn't much bigger than the great white sharks, which was pretty exciting. But I also got my first opportunity to ban birds. And one of our jobs when we were on the island was we had to keep a log of every bird we saw all day long. And then at the end of the night, we would tally all of those birds. And by the end of that time on the Farallon Islands, I was hooked, and ended up going back to Connecticut, and I got my master's degree at Connecticut College, and worked for a few years at Yale University in one of their vector-borne disease labs, looking at the relationship between birds and small mammals and diseases like Lyme disease and West Nile virus. And then I finally got a job with Audubon, and here I am, I think 13 years later, as the director of bird conservation. So I also want to say just a bit about Audubon. Audubon Connecticut is the state office of the National Audubon Society, and we're actually a regional office now. We sort of joined together with Audubon New York, so it's Audubon Connecticut, New York. Long name, but that is what we are. We're sort of a regional office, and we are one of Connecticut's most influential bird conservation organizations. We are working through advocacy, education, science, and land management to protect the places that birds live across Connecticut and New York. We're also a partner addressing a wide range of environmental, human health issues. And, if you think about it, well, I would say partner is actually the most important word in that statement, because all the work we do, we could not do without partners, including the Onnecticut Audubon Society. So super glad to be presenting today to this group. And we're also a leader in setting a course for environmental sustainability in Connecticut. A lot of the things that we're doing to benefit birds, they're also benefiting people too. So, healthy habitats, clean water, clean air. These are all things that are good for birds, but they're good for people as well. And we are part of the National Audubon Society. And I would say that the thing that excites me the most about being part of the National Audubon Society is knowing that the work that I do here in Connecticut is being replicated in New York. It's being replicated in Maryland. It's being replicated in Florida. We now have our Audubon Americas program. So the work that we're doing here is being replicated in Colombia, in Chile, in Mexico, just across Central America and into South America. We are working collectively to protect birds across their life cycles. Now, as I mentioned before, our agenda for today is we're going to go over some salt marsh basics. Then we're going to talk about historic and current threats to salt marshes, strategies for increasing salt marsh resilience, and then we'll go into some projects in Connecticut. So first, what is a salt marsh? Here's a picture of the salt marsh at Great Meadows, which is a unit of the Stupid McKinney Refuge and National Wildlife in Stratford, Connecticut. And this is a picture that was before restoration. There's some invasive plants on the right-hand side of this picture here, but you have some nice natural salt marsh on the left-hand side. And probably the first thing you're noticing is there's a lot of water in this system. So bingo. Salt marshes are flat vegetated areas that are subject to regular flooding. And some areas of a salt marsh flood every day at high tide. So they're getting flooded twice a day. And those areas are considered the low marsh. And often they're dominated by the grass called Spartina alterniflora, or salt marsh cordgrass, which is this grass that you can see right here. And then there is the high marsh, which is areas of the marsh that are flooded just several times a month. So when we have high tides that correspond with the full moon or with the new moon, that's when you have flooding in the high marsh. And the high marsh is typically contains grasses such as Spartina patens, which is the salt meadow cordgrass, Disticulus spicata, spike grass, and then Juncus gerardii, which is also known as blackgrass. And all those grasses, you wouldn't think it because they're grasses, but they take in a lot of carbon dioxide during the growing season. And then that carbon dioxide is stored long-term in the marsh peat that is sort of beneath the grasses. So they play an important role in carbon sequestration. Here is another picture of a salt marsh. This is one that was taken by Dave Kozak, formerly of the Connecticut DEP Office of the Long Island Sound. And it just gives you another look at sort of the different habitat types in a salt marsh. So you can see the Spartina alterniflora, or, which makes up the low marsh, sort of along the edges of this tidal creek here. Then you can see the high marsh. So this is Spartina patens that looks like it's all blown over in this area here, and then off in the distance. And then you may have some transitional marsh. So right on the edges, I can see some Juncus gerardii on these edges here. And then there's some Iva frutescens, or salt marsh high tide bush that is in the sort of edge of the picture here. You also can get Bacchus humilifolia, or groundsel bush, is another very salt tolerant bush that you often see right on the edges of salt marshes. Now, salt marshes, they provide habitat for birds like the Saltmarsh sparrow, the clapper rail, and the seaside sparrow, and the willet. These are our four birds that breed in and nest in salt marshes, and obviously use them during migration as well. We have, according to the SHARP, the Salt Marsh Habitat and Avian, I'm trying to remember what the R and the P stand for. I'll look it up and I'll throw it in the chat later, or Dennis will throw it in the chat for me. But that survey effort of salt marsh birds has indicated that there's about 5,000 acres of salt marshes in Connecticut. And though, the sort of variability in sort of the standard deviation for the species is quite variable. We have somewhere around maybe 1,500 Saltmarsh sparrow, somewhere in the vicinity of 150 clapper rail, roughly 1,000 seaside sparrow, and roughly 800 willets in the state of Connecticut. And these populations are declining. For Saltmarsh sparrow, the decline in Connecticut is about 9.5% per year, and for clapper rail, the decline is about 12.9% per year. Willet and seaside sparrow aren't declining at the moment, and hopefully it'll stay that way, but we will see, and I'll get into sort of why these species are declining in a little bit further in the presentation. But there's a lot of reasons that salt marshes are important. They're not just homes to birds. There's the birds that nest in them, but they're also very valuable as sort of spawning, nursery, and feeding grounds for shellfish and finfish, and also shorebirds and long-legged waders. So they do provide habitat for a large variety of wildlife. They're also important for nutrient cycling, and when waters are when stormwater is sort of flowing into Long Island Sound, our salt marshes help absorb nitrogen from that water, and make sure that the water quality of Long Island Sound is better than it would be otherwise. As I mentioned, salt marshes play a critical role in carbon sequestration. They're one of the top 3 blue carbon sources. And they also are super valuable to human communities, because during storms, like we had a pretty big storm, I think it was 2 weeks ago now. And during that storm, a salt marsh is going to absorb wave energy, and they're also going to absorb floodwater. So they play a really important role in protecting coastal communities. But salt marshes are under a variety of threats. There's sort of historic threats that salt marshes have faced, and now they are facing some new threats. One of the historic threats was sort of filling of salt marshes prior to 1970s. In the 1970s, laws were passed that made it so you couldn't fill salt marshes anymore. But prior to that, there was a lot of filling of salt marshes. And this picture here, which is also from Great Meadows Marsh, you can see a big sort of packing facility. I think this is a FedEx shipping facility over here. And this area was filled in. It was previous salt marsh. This area that you see in the sort of middle ground of the picture, this was also filled in, but thankfully was restored during a restoration project that took place around the year 2000. This area had been filled in, and it had been full of Phragmites, like you can sort of see in the foreground. And then there was funding for a restoration project that brought the sort of removed, I think actually there might have been an area that was being developed maybe to the west of this site, and there was some mitigation funding available from that development, and that was used to remove remove some of the material from this area that was filled, bringing down the elevation and replanting with native salt marsh grasses. So this area was sort of all filled in. It was all full of Phragmites, which is another threat to salt marshes. But it thankfully was restored. So filling of salt marshes prior to the 1970s, invasive plant species such as Phragmites. That is kind of the biggest threat to salt marshes in terms of plants, but there's other invasive plants as well that can be found on the edges of salt marshes. And then changes to hydrology as a result of ditching or restrictions. So bridges that go over salt marshes, railroads that go through salt marshes, culverts that disrupt their flow. Those are all problems for salt marshes. They prevent the sort of natural ebb and flow of water in and out of marshes. And mosquito ditches, or people were ditching marshes well before they were ditching them for mosquitoes for various farming purposes. But the ditches definitely, change the flow of water in and out of a marsh. When you have, ditching in a marsh, what the ditching does is it allows the marsh, when at high tide, the water flows in really fast, and at low tide, the water flows out really fast. And that means that any sediment that's being carried by the water that might naturally replenish the marsh and allow it to keep up with things like sea level rise, it doesn't have the chance to settle out of the water. It just flows in, it flows back out again. So that is one of the challenges with ditches. But another challenge with ditches, and you can sort of see it in this picture here, is that when they carve out a ditch, or when they used to make mosquito ditches back in the early 1900s, they would sort of carve out a channel, and then that material that was carved out would just kind of get distributed on the sides of the channel. And what can happen is that, when you get a really high tide, maybe around the full moon, and the water comes up the ditch, it sort of floods out over the edges of this sort of berm along the edge of the ditch. And then that water can't get out. So then you can have water just sort of building up on the marsh. And eventually, while the low marsh can tolerate being flooded twice a day, it can't tolerate being underwater all the time. So you can end up with these pools on the sort of adjacent to where there was a ditch, where there was these little berms along the edge of a ditch. And then those pools, you end up not having vegetation in those areas. So it's another way that mosquito ditches or old farming ditches can sort of disrupt the natural flow of salt water in and out of marshes. So that brings us to our current threats to salt marshes. And really, sea level rise is an enormous threat to our salt marshes. This picture sort of just shows you the different parts of a marsh here. So don't necessarily pay attention to these lines just yet, but you might have sort of mud flats between mean low water and mean tide, sort of this area here. Then between the mean tide level and the mean high water level, that's where your low marsh can be found. And then between mean high water and extreme high water, this is where your high marsh can be found. And then you maybe have your transitional marsh right along the edges. So what's happening with sea level rise, as our seas are rising, that is basically pushing the low marsh landward, and that's pushing the high marsh landward, hopefully into some of this transitional marsh. But if you have an area that's developed, there isn't really room for the high marsh to go, or if the elevation change is quite great, and that's the case in Connecticut. There are a lot of places where our elevation changes quite dramatically, from a couple of inches above sea level rise to suddenly 3 or 4 feet above sea level rise, and that can be hard. A marsh, it's hard for a marsh to be able to sort of make that jump up to those higher elevations. So, with sea level rise, we're sort of seeing the low marsh is getting flooded more frequently, and some of it is transitioning to just sort of tidal flats or unvegetated peat. The high marsh is starting to get flooded more frequently, so some of it is transitioning to low marsh, and then it's trying to move into sort of the transitional marsh area. But in a lot of places in Connecticut, there isn't space for it to migrate. And as a result of this, and as climate change and sea level rise continue, our marshes are just, we have a barrier of developed land, or just a high change in elevation. As sea level rises, our marshes are going to get narrower and narrower. We're going to see a lot of high marsh transitioning to low marsh, a lot of low marsh transitioning to unvegetated peat. This is an example of what this looks like. So here is, this area, this is the mouth of the Connecticut River. And this is the SLAM model for 2010. SLAM stands for Sea Level Affecting Marsh Model. That's what it stands for. And this area that's green right now is all high marsh. So the type of marsh that only gets flooded several times a month. And if we go to, you can sort of see the extent of the marsh here right now. And then you go to 2055, and you can see that in some of these areas, the marsh is able to migrate. So especially this area right up here, you can definitely see that the marsh is able to sort of migrate into this area. So there isn't any development. The elevation change is nice and gradual, so the marsh is able to migrate there. But as sea levels continue to rise, you can see by 2085, the marsh has migrated about as much as it's going to. And now we are starting to see a transition away from high marsh to low marsh or unvegetated peat. All of these areas that were green are either, by 2085, either low marsh or just sort of unvegetated flats. And this is sort of what that looks like in real life. And we are slowly starting to see this in Connecticut. So we again have this picture of a healthy marsh on the left, dominated by high marsh grasses, Spartina patens, Disticus spicata, Juncus gerardii. And we have a picture in the middle that shows what is really, an area that is this is entirely Spartina alterniflora, or the salt marsh cordgrass, so the low marsh grasses. And as that gets wetter and wetter, you're seeing it transition to just this unvegetated peat area. And with this transition, this area really important, high value to birds, other wildlife. This marsh is able to sequester a lot of carbon. It's able to absorb nitrogen out of stormwater. It's able to absorb a lot of water during flooding events, absorb wave energy. The low marsh can still do some of those things, but doesn't have as much ecological value. But then when you get to this point of having just unvegetated peat, we really have lost a lot of the value of a salt marsh at this point. So this is a kind of a pretty scary scenario. We have these, 5,000 acres of salt marsh in Connecticut that are protecting our coastlines, that are holding carbon, that are absorbing floodwaters. But we are potentially looking at a future where we are going to have substantially less salt marsh. And that actually has a big impact on the Saltmarsh sparrow. So let me tell you a little bit more about the Saltmarsh sparrow. Saltmarsh sparrows, I kind of think they're fascinating. They're these little birds. They're really hard to get a good look at, but they're fascinating birds. So right now, Saltmarsh sparrow are slowly making their way to Connecticut. They're maybe still a little bit to our south, maybe in Maryland, but they are going to probably arrive in Connecticut roughly around the first week of May. And let me think about this. We had the new moon was on the 8th of this month. So the full moon will be roughly around the 22nd, which means the next new moon will be, let's say, around the May 6th. So these birds are going to be arriving during a new moon. And then about 2 weeks later will be the first full moon. And during that full moon, then their nesting area, so maybe we're looking at the 3rd week of March, will be very inundated with water during the full moon. And so any nest that these birds have attempted to lay during that time period, so it's kind of this time period right here, it is probably going to get washed out. And during a full moon, during high tide, the tides are so high that that's really not a time for Saltmarsh sparrow to be nesting. But as soon as that sort of full moon starts to wane, or wax, I'm not sure which is the right term, but as we kind of get past the full moon, that is when these birds jump into action, and they lay their eggs over the course of, they build their nest, they lay their eggs over the course of 5 to 6 days. Then they start incubation, which is, I don't know off the top of my head how long incubation is, but they do their incubating. I'm assuming it's something like 10 to 12 days. And then they raise their chicks hatch out of the eggs, and they have this limited time before we get to that next full moon high tide. And these birds are pretty amazing. So sometimes when you get a high tides around the new moon, which is in this time period here, the nests might get flooded. But as long as the eggs stay in the nest, they can tolerate sort of being covered with salt water for a few hours. And the nests of the Saltmarsh sparrow actually have a cap on the top, and that sort of helps hold the eggs in place. So they might be covered in, they might be sort of floating in the water for an hour or so, but then the water recedes and the female will go back to incubating again. And then after the eggs hatch, if the birds are a little bit off sync and we maybe get a fairly high tide associated with the new moon, the chicks, as long as they're mobile, they can actually climb up on top of the sort of nest roof, or they can climb up into the vegetation. And same thing, once the tide recedes, they go back into the nest, and the mom and dad can continue to feed them and take care of them. So it takes roughly 24 days for a Saltmarsh sparrow to go, build its nest, lay its eggs, incubate its eggs, and then get its chicks to the point that they are mobile and they can kind of climb out of the nest, in the case of a high tide event. But the challenge with sea level rise is that these, the birds are maybe roughly nesting at the same elevation, but the tides are getting higher. So you can sort of see this shrinking time period that the birds can nest. So as the tides just before and just after the full moon get a bit higher, the amount of time that the birds have between the full moons is shrinking. And then also the high tides during the new moon are higher than they used to be. So there's definitely this higher chance of inundation of the nest in the middle of incubation. And unfortunately, that is slowly but surely having a negative impact on Saltmarsh sparrow. And the prediction is that, by 2050, there's a pretty good chance that this bird is going to go extinct, because the number of 23-day windows that are in the breeding season is going to basically just fall off. There's not going to be enough time for these birds to be able to build their nests, lay their eggs, incubate their eggs, and then get their chicks to the age where they're able to leave the nest during a high tide event. So it is looking, things are not looking good for the Saltmarsh Sparrow. And the Saltmarsh Sparrow is sort of like the canary in the coal mine, back in the time that coal was being mined, in places like Pennsylvania, the Appalachians, they would bring a canary in the mine because if there was unhealthy conditions for people, the canary would feel those conditions first, and then it might get sick, it might die, and it was a signal to the miners to get out of the cave. Well, the Saltmarsh Sparrow is a signal to us that, hey, things are not looking good in our salt marshes. We are seeing, Saltmarsh Sparrow declining at 9.5% a year in Connecticut, 9% per year across its range. And it is looking, like based on current predictions that we just have the next 10 years or so to figure out how we are going to prevent the Saltmarsh Sparrow from going extinct. So what are our strategies? What can we do about this? It is a pretty bleak outlook for the Saltmarsh Sparrow, for other salt marsh nesting birds, but also for humans, because salt marshes are so important. So what can we do about that? So there really are three strategies that we are employing here in Connecticut to make sure that Saltmarsh Sparrow and our salt marshes in general have a fighting chance and are really as resilient as they can be to, future, higher sea levels that are potentially expected in the future. One of them is to protect marsh migration areas. And, this is a picture from Hammonasset that I took maybe 2 weeks ago. And this used to be a trail that you would cut through from, if you were at the nature center and you were walking to the next point, where you would kind of walk along this trail. And I actually noticed last fall, I'm like, that the vegetation on both sides of the trail was salt marsh grasses. There was some Spartina patens, there was some Juncus gerardii, so salt meadow cordgrass and blackgrass literally growing right on the edges of this trail. And I was like, the marsh wants to migrate into this area. And sure enough, this spring, the park closed the trail, and they have sort of established another trail further, to the south of where this trail is located right now. But they are allowing the marsh that you can see to the right of the picture to migrate into this area. So it's a very small scale example of marsh migration, but you can literally see it in this photo here. And that is something I'm going to talk a little bit more about, a project at the East River Marsh that onnecticut was involved in, that took place back in 2020. And it was an example of a strategy that one might use to protect marsh migration areas. Another thing we can do is restore degraded marshes. So I mentioned that there are historic threats that our marshes have been facing. Some of our marshes have been filled in. There is a lot of mosquito ditching. There might be sort of pools adjacent to ditches where there isn't any vegetation. And there are various things that can be done to make those marshes healthier. And a healthy marsh is going to be more likely to be resilient to future sea level rise. And then the last thing we can do is, where we do have healthy marshes, what we want to make them as resilient as possible. So, Hammonasset Beach State Park is a good example of that. It is facing some threats, but it is a very healthy marsh system, and we want to do some mitigation to make sure that marsh continues to be healthy and as resilient as possible to sea level rise. So, a little bit about the East River Marsh project. So this is a project that took place in 2020, which I think everybody remembers as the year of the pandemic. So it was a challenging year to be running a project, and I think the project was definitely impacted by that challenge. But basically, in 2020, the state of Connecticut had a certain amount of funding that was available and could be used to protect marsh migration areas. So this is a project that Dave Kozak, again, formerly with the DEP, was the lead on. But we thought it was a great project. onnecticut thought it was a great project. Connecticut Audubon thought it was a great project. Connecticut Sea Grant was involved too. The idea, and so just a little background, there's the East River Marsh, located on the border of Guilford and Madison. And the idea is, was basically like, let's look at where the marsh is now. And this picture on the left is, where the marsh is predicted to be in 2055. But let's look where it is now. Look at where it is predicted the marsh will be in 2055, where it's predicted it will be in 2100. And look for areas where the marsh will migrate. And so this picture on the far right is the areas that are more than 10 acres that have the potential to be sort of marsh migration areas. So the state actually did this sort of analysis and sort of identified these marsh migration areas adjacent to the current boundary of the East River Marsh. And then Luke McCroney, who was working for me at the time, was able to sort of help Dave with a sort of a next level analysis. So we took those marsh migration areas, which are outlined in red, and we overlaid them on sort of tax property maps. And then the areas that were already protected land were sort of coded one color. And then privately owned parcels that were more than 2 acres were given sort of this yellow color. And then we went in and looked at sort of high resolution ground cover maps and just sort of looked at whether, there was whether we really thought there was potential for migration in these areas. And for the roughly 60 areas that were the most promising, we decided that we would try to reach out to those landowners and see if they were interested in the state purchasing a conservation easement on part of their land, not their whole property, but just the part of the land where it was looking like a marsh might be able to migrate. So before we did the outreach to these residents, Dave Kozak developed a sort of an East River Marsh fact sheet and sent it around for a lot of people to sort of look over and make sure it looked good. Then he worked to sort of inform other divisions of the DEEP and requested assistance in outreach. I remember Dave gave a presentation to the Long Island Sound Habitat Restoration and Stewardship Work Group, just again to get more sort of insight and input on sort of how to move forward with the process, sort of approaching landowners and talking to them about marsh migration and sort of seeing if they were interested in conservation easements. For those of you who maybe don't know what a conservation easement is basically what it is you can, when you're trying to protect land, you can buy a property outright, which is called fee acquisition, or you can buy the development rights to a property or a portion of a property. So in this case, what we were looking to do, or what the state was looking to do with the funding that they had available, was to purchase the development rights for the area of a person's property that was in this sort of marsh migration area. So one of the things we did was we did work with Earth Economics, which is a consulting company, and they were also able to do an economic analysis of the East River Marsh and sort of estimate that sort of economic value, sort of the dollar value for the various services that the marsh provided in Guilford and Madison. So once we had all these materials, there was an East River Marsh virtual online forum that took place on October 21st, 2020. And we basically got out word about this online forum to Audubon members within a 20-mile radius of Guilford and Madison, and also got out the word to those 63 target landowners via a postcard. And then, we just did whatever we could to sort of build up awareness about this forum. Like I said, we sent 2 postcards to the sort of marsh migration area landowners. We advertised the forum in the local press. We produced and distributed a video starring Juliana Barrett from Connecticut Sea Grants, sort of as a supplement to the info in the presentation, but really just trying to build awareness about this effort, about this forum that was taking place, hoping to get some of these target landowners to attend. And then after the forum, we sent additional emails and letters to the marsh migration landowners, and then, just sort of expressing our willingness to meet with them, and then just continued outreach. We met with the Guilford Land Acquisition Committee, the Guilford and Madison Land Trusts, talked to, the Madison Audubon Shop, and other environmental leaders in the area, just in hopes that, the message about, these marsh migration areas, their value and the sort of desire that the state had to be able to purchase the conservation easements from property owners. We really just wanted to get the word out about that. So put in all this effort, but unfortunately, we didn't have too much response. There were a few landowners that reached out to us, and one of the landowners, we even met with them on their property. We walked the area where the marsh migration area, that was part of the marsh migration area. We actually could see that this area was slowly starting to transition to a salt marsh, and that landowner was interested in moving forward. And we got to the point where a conservation easement was drafted, but unfortunately there was some restrictions associated with the easement that the landowner didn't like, and unfortunately it just didn't move forward. But I think it was a tough time to be doing something like this, because first of all, there was somewhat of a short timeline. We had a funding source, but it was going to expire in 2021, so we had to act quickly. Second, it was still during COVID. There was certainly no way we could go to door. We couldn't go to these marsh migration landowners' doors and knock on the door. It was just not the time to be able to do that. And then it was also sort of in the time frame of the holiday season, which is a time when everybody is busy. So unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of response. But this sort of thing can take time. It might be that these landowners got the postcard, maybe they heard about this effort, and maybe it's something they're mulling over. And it could be that 5 years from now, we may actually hear from some of these people saying, hey, is there's still interest? I might be interested in doing that now. So, there are, and, that is kind of the case with protecting, marsh migration areas, protecting land, is sometimes it can take a while. And if those landowners do reach out to us eventually, I think we would definitely, be interested in helping them set up conservation easements. We may have to find another funding source, but it definitely would be something I would be willing to work towards. And there are some additional things that we can do. So we can just continue to contact and reach out to those marsh migration area landowners in hopes of sort of deepening understanding and educating them about what a conservation easement is and the benefits of it. And we can also reach out to other states and find out, if they have tried to identify and protect marsh migration areas. And that is something that the state of Connecticut did do as a sort of a second, as a sort of a follow-up, was they did reach out to, New York, a couple of other states to sort of understand, what efforts they're taking to protect marsh migration areas. And then it might be that we need to explore other alternatives to conservation easements. A conservation easement is a legal binding document. It may be that landowners weren't too excited about that. Maybe there is some other type of agreement that could be put in place to protect marsh migration areas. So, while we weren't successful in protecting any marsh migration areas through this effort, I do think we learned a lot from it, which is why I'm glad to still talk about it, because those lessons learned are valuable. And this is one of the strategies that we can take to, protect our future marshes. And, it might not be something that people are interested in right now, but with sea level rise, with time, it might be something that our people are more interested in pursuing. Okay, moving on. So next place I'm going to talk about is Great Meadows Marsh. And this is an example of a marsh that was fairly degraded. I think there we go. And what happened here was that this is a Bridgeport Harbor over here. And in the 1950s, Bridgeport Harbor was dredged. I'm not sure why my slides are advancing on their own. Not sure what's going on there, but I'll try to talk quickly, I guess. Bridgeport Harbor was dredged, and they took the materials and they dumped them into the Great Meadows Marsh. And that is sort of these areas here where you can see a lot of trees. These are sort of areas where there's a lot of fill in the marsh. Actually, most of this area was roughly filled in. There was a berm, and how they would do this was they would build a berm, and this is basically the outline of where the berm was before this project took place. And then they would, after they built the berm, they would fill in the area behind it. So this area was sort of filled in. You had a lot of phragmites all across this area. When we were first preparing for this restoration project, I would try to walk from roughly here out to this area here, and it was just walking through a sea of Phragmites. It was very, very challenging traveling through this marsh. There was also a lot of impoundments in this marsh. So you can sort of see this big pond here. This is an area where, water would maybe get in during a high tide, or, you'd have a big rainstorm and water would just pool on site. One of the other challenges of this marsh area was the most heavily mosquito infested area in the entire state at the time of the restoration project. When we were getting ready to get started on the restoration at this site, Audubon and partners met with some construction contractors and had to do a site walk, and I have never been so covered in mosquitoes in my entire life. So that was another challenge with this site, and it made it so people did not want to visit the refuge. National wildlife refuges protect wildlife and their habitat, but they're places that people can visit too. But the fact that there were so many mosquitoes in this area because of sort of impounded water, it really made it very unpleasant to visit this site in the summer months. So for this project, in addition sort of restoring the marsh, we did have some focal species. Those were the marsh pink, stellaris, or Sebaceous stellaris, which is an endangered plant. It's only found at the Great Meadows Marsh in Connecticut. The Saltmarsh Sparrow, which was nesting at Great Meadows prior to restoration, and we wanted to make sure that it continued to nest at Great Meadows while we were restoring its habitat. And then also the diamondback terrapin. Bridgeport, Stratford is one area in the state where we see quite a lot of diamondback terrapin. But with that berm wrapping around the site, it really made the upland areas of the site inaccessible to the diamondback terrapin, and that they would have to climb up over this berm in order to get to some nesting habitat. So this 40-acre project site was sort of divided up into 6 different areas. There was the diamondback terrapin area here, where the idea was to sort of remove this berm so that and then regrade so that the diamondback terrapins could more easily access this area for nesting. There was the marsh pink area where we wanted to bring the marsh elevation down to an elevation that would be good for marsh pink growth. There was the creek improvement area, and here we wanted to basically restore tidal flow to this area so that these spots where water was impounded could more easily drain out of the marsh. There was also the hummock area, and this is where the Saltmarsh Sparrow were nesting, but this area was getting wetter and wetter, and the feeling was that the Saltmarsh Sparrow were going to be unlikely to be able to continue to nest there. So what we did was we created 14 hummocks, or sort of elevated islands of sediment and vegetation, in hopes that the Saltmarsh Sparrow would actually have these little micro topography, these micro areas that they could use in the years ahead. And then there's the Southern Hill and the Northern Site Improvement area. And the Southern Hill was an area where, again, the elevation was higher than it should be for salt marshes because of fill. So the elevation here was brought down. And then the Northern Site Improvement area was an area where the marsh was starting to sort of drown because of sea level rise. So we took sediment from here and we added it over here to sort of bring the edges of this marsh up in elevation. So I'm going to kind of walk you through some of those areas. So this is the hummock area. And this is what it looked like pre-restoration. And you can see that there were these areas that were really quite wet. I remember when we were trying to figure out where we were going to put the hummocks, we were out there walking around, and there was definitely one spot that I was standing in a foot of water. And what we did was we sort of identified the low places in this area, and that is where we built the hummocks. And you can sort of see the sort of process of building these mounds. And then here there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in this picture. And then this is post-restoration. So this is what they looked like last year. And I was out there on last Tuesday. No, this Tuesday. This Tuesday I was out there. And what's really amazing is, we planted these hummocks with sort of a combination of Spartina patens, Disticus spicata, and then Juncus gerardii. But the amount of sort of other native plants that have come in and are growing on the hummocks now is amazing. There are so many plants that, because salt marshes, there is this daily inundation from the tide, there's a real, it's very easy for seeds to sort of float in on a high tide and get deposited. So these areas where we, originally only had 3 types of vegetation now have something like 40 different types of vegetation in just 2 years. So, I'm happy to report that, we were very careful in the sort of construction of these hummocks, in that the Saltmarsh sparrows that were nesting in the areas between the hummocks, the sort of slightly higher habitat, that was, where we didn't put the hummocks. Those birds did return in 2022 and are continuing to nest on the site. And we haven't seen them nest on the hummocks yet, but that does take time, because Saltmarsh sparrow need sort of a lot of dead vegetation, the grass grows and then it, dies over the winter months and sort of builds up sort of a vegetated sort of layer. And that's what the Saltmarsh sparrows need to nest in. So it might take another year or 2 before they start to nest in them, but we've got our fingers crossed. And UConn is very actively monitoring the site to understand, how the birds are utilizing it. And then this is the creek improvement area. So this is that pool that I mentioned where, the water, either runoff from rain, or maybe there was a really high tide and this area got sort of flooded. This was kind of mosquito central before the restoration project. And then there were also 3 sort of culverts that were no longer functioning on the site. So we removed those culverts, and then we are able to reconnect this pool to a tidal creek. And so now if you go to the site, it's not something you can really see from the trails, but there's this amazing tidal creek that flows through that area of the site now. This is the area that was the marsh pink restoration area. One thing you can see if you visit Great Meadows is you can see there's a pond right sort of by the parking lot, and there's a viewing platform that looks out on the pond. And prior to restoration, it was completely 100% surrounded by Phragmites. So as part of the restoration effort, we removed the Phragmites from around the pond, and we have since done 2 rounds of invasive plant management just to 100% get the Phragmites out of this area. And I'm super excited to report that in 2023, the marsh pink population exploded at Great Meadows. So, this endangered plant that is only found at Great Meadows, the number of places that we found it in 2023 were substantially larger than, we started across a much larger area than we did in 2021. So it did respond very positively to the habitat changes that were made around the pond. This is the diamondback terrapin area, and you can sort of see in pre-restoration, this was that berm that was wrapping around the site. This is once the berm was removed, and this sort of shows post-restoration. This is you can see a little bit of Phragmites in here that has since been treated, and the vegetation has grown in quite a bit more than you can see in this picture. And then we do have some antecedent evidence. We have found a couple of terrapin nests that were dug up by predators in this area. So we do know that the diamondback terrapins are more easily able to access this area now. And a group of youth that we've had working on the property since 2022, the Saltmarsh stewards, they're actually going to be doing diamondback terrapin surveys in this area this summer. So we will have some more quantitative data to sort of show whether or not terrapins are using this new habitat. And let's see here. One more spot. This is the northern site improvement area. And this is that area where before restoration, we were really seeing this area of the marsh sort of getting flooded, as a result of sea level rise and sort of turning into this unvegetated peat. So we were able to take material from the southern hill and add it to this area and then replant it. And you can sort of see this is sort of after you can see all the vegetation that's being established in this area. And, we're continuing to work at Great Meadows. The bulk of restoration was done in the winter of 2021 to 2022. But, with a big restoration project like this, you can't just do it and walk away. It requires adaptive management, some fine tuning. So, we're continuing to control invasives in the restored area. We're continuing to replant. One thing is that we, initially had worked on about 40 acres of salt marsh. But then we recognized that in the uplands directly adjacent to the site, there was quite a lot of invasives. So we were able to get additional funding from the Long Island Sound Study to do some invasive management in the uplands. And now we're in the process of replanting the uplands. We've also done additional plantings on the Southern Hill. We've run our Saltmarsh Steward program, which employs local youth to help out with the restoration in 2022, 2023, and we are going to have the students back again in 2024. We're continuing to monitor the marsh pink or the Sebaceous stellaris. And then we do have a few areas where there is, water collecting because of, all the rain we've had or particularly high tides. So we are working with the wetland habitat and mosquito management program at DEEP to create runnels to sort of drain those pools, or alternatively make the pools bigger so that fish can live in them too, and then the fish can eat the mosquitoes. And there's also a lot of monitoring just going on site to understand if restoration is successful. So, Great Meadows Marsh has been a pretty awesome project. About 40 acres of marsh and uplands on their way to being restored, 2,000 feet of new tidal creeks constructed, 14 hummocks, nearly 6,000 tons of Phragmites removed from the site, 200,000 native plants installed, 400 plus volunteer hours, 20 paid stewardship interns, and then Saltmarsh Sparrow have been continuing to return to the site. And lots of amazing funders involved in this project too. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them. Okay, I know it's 8 o'clock, so I'm going to try to be quick. I want to just talk a bit about the project that we are hoping to move forward on next, and that is at Hammonasset Beach State Park, which I'm sure many of you know and love, but it's 936 acres located in Madison, Connecticut. It's Connecticut's most visited state park. It sees about 3 million visitors annually. It provides protection to Clinton Harbor, and it is one of the most ecologically important areas in the state. But unfortunately, it is threatened by sea level rise and coastal storms. Now, I'm going to skip that slide. These are the partners that are involved in this future restoration project. I do want to point out Monongatuk Audubon Society is a partner on the project, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what Monongatuk is going to be doing as part of this project. But I want to show you just kind of lay the groundwork for why restoration, or why we may need to take steps to increase the resilience of Hammonasset Beach State Park. So this is an image from 1934. This is kind of actually might even be before, Meg's Point was included in the park. You can see that there was a lot of sort of ditching of the park, either for farming or for mosquitoes, in this image. But you can also see that, there is a huge area of healthy looking salt marsh, other than the mosquito ditches at the east end of the park. And now I want to just show a picture from 2022. So we've got our 1934 photo on the left. We have our 2022 photo on the right. And I think that it's pretty easy for everybody to see that this marsh is shrinking. You can see that there is a large area here and another area here where the marsh has eroded pretty substantially. And when you look at that from the air, you can see it here as well. So this area here, this area here, this is all sections of marsh that have eroded, and what's left is just the sort of this unvegetated peat. We've also, that's what this is here on the right. You can sort of see this unvegetated peat. We've also noticed that this was a very active piping plover, oystercatcher, least tern nesting area as recently as 2016. But as the erosion on the eastern shore of Hammonasset has continued, the amount of sand that is remaining is less, and that it is also getting lower in elevation, so that it's topped by high tides pretty frequently, in that it makes it pretty hard for piping plover and least terns to be able to nest there anymore. This is a map that was made by the WHAM Department of DEP, the Wetland Habitat and Mosquito Management Division. And it really just sort of shows the area of marsh that has been lost. Our first image was from 1934, but you can sort of see that the rate of marsh loss has been accelerating, especially since roughly around 2000 to now. The rate of erosion of the eastern shore Hammonasset is just increasing dramatically, to the point that it's roughly, 7 feet a year. And over this time period, 1934 to now, we've lost about 30 acres of marsh, and most of that in just the last 10 to 15 years. One facet of the site that may actually help with sort of restoration efforts at Hammonasset is that directly adjacent to it is Clinton Harbor. And Clinton Harbor is dredged periodically. It's going to be dredged this summer, and then it'll be dredged again in a couple more years. And why that is a positive is that, on the east shore of Hammonasset, we've lost a lot of sediment. As this marsh is eroded, a lot of sediment has been lost. So with all this dredge, when this area is dredged, there is potentially the opportunity of taking dredge material from Clinton Harbor and using it to restore the marshes at Hammonasset. Another challenge that Hammonasset is facing is, I mentioned early on in the presentation that culverts are a problem for salt marshes because they can sort of restrict the natural ebb and flow of salt water in and out of a marsh. So there are some culverts at Hammonasset, 2 along the main road and 1 in the campground, that, maybe 50 years ago were perfectly functional culverts, but, with the passage of time and with sea level rise and also the increased intensity and frequency of storms, those culverts are not in good shape. And the surrounding marsh next to these culverts, you can see has sort of been cut away as a result of sort of these restrictions. So there are culverts in the park that can no longer handle the natural, maybe not no longer natural ebb and flow of salt water because there's more salt water than before coming in and out of these areas. But there are also these culverts on the site that are certainly in need of replacement, but may need to be replaced with bigger culverts or maybe with box culverts or maybe even bridges to sort of really allow for the natural flow of salt water in and out of the marshes. And this is just another example. This shows one of the culverts during one of the storms that we've had this past winter, and you can see that that culvert certainly is not able to accommodate the amount of water that needs to flow in and out of the marsh during a storm. So what are we doing about it? I'm happy to report that Audubon Connecticut is partnering, with the DEEP Land and Water Resource Division to really look into what is causing the challenges at Hammonasset. Why is the eastern shore eroding? So we are just about to contract with an engineering firm that's going to be conducting wind wave and sediment transport and hydrological modeling to understand the causes of eroding along the eastern shore. They're also going to be assessing the viability and the functional culverts in the park. And then for both the eastern shore and also for the culverts, they're going to do an alternatives analysis to sort of understand what are the options, what are the possible solutions to these problems once we have all the data to really understand, what is happening at these sites along the eastern shore and then where the culverts are located. There'll also be a lot of baseline data collected so that if there is a future restoration project, we'll sort of be able to look at before and after conditions. And the goal of the current funding is to actually get to the point of having a preferred option for some sort of restoration project along the eastern shore. And then also understand what needs to be done about the culverts to sort of get that figured out so that we can, continue to move this project forward. And then also we want to recognize that Hammonasset is the most visited park in the state of Connecticut. We also wanted to make sure the community was involved in this project. So as we are sort of assessing and understanding the reasons for erosion at the park, we're also working to try to get people from the surrounding area, particularly people from state identified environmental justice communities, sort of involved in this project. And that is sort of taking the form of teacher trainings. We had our first teacher training about a week and a half ago at the Nature Center. We had 14 teachers participate, and then a number of them are bringing their classes to Hammonasset for free field trips this spring. And then we hope to run another teacher training in the fall and again have free field trips for their students. In order to make sure that this project we are being inclusive and we are being equitable, That's why we are making teacher training, and the field trips are entirely free to the participants, so that anybody from any community can come to Hammonasset and learn about salt marshes, learn about their value, and learn about this restoration project that is in the works. We are also working with Onnecticut Audubon Society. Many of you probably know about the Urbanscapes program that Onnecticut and CPEN have developed, and we are going to be passing funds to Onnecticut and CPEN to basically continue to bring on students to grow plants, and they're going to specifically focus on growing salt marsh plants. One thing, for a project like Great Meadows, where we purchased 200,000 plants, none of those plants came from Connecticut. They almost all came from Massachusetts or New Jersey. So right now there isn't really a source of salt marsh plants in Connecticut. So there is kind of a niche that could be filled. And we're hoping to, by passing funding to Onnecticut and CPEN to be able to employ students and young professionals to grow salt marsh plants, that not only are we giving youth an experience of sort of learning about growing plants and sort of being involved in sort of a restoration project, but that there's the possibility that these plants could be used by all sorts of different restoration projects along the coast of Connecticut. And then last thing I just want to mention is that, just to sort of bring the general public into this project and let them know about this work that's taking place, we are going to be hosting 4 salt marsh days at the park this summer. I think the dates are June 27th, July 13th, July 27th, and August 10th. And these are going to be events that are going to mostly be taking place at the Nature Center, but we will have speakers. We will have guided nature walks. There'll be all sorts of sort of tables with activities set up, and really hoping to get the word out to visitors to the park on those days, just about the value of salt marshes to birds, to wildlife, to people, the threats they are facing, and the sort of different strategies we are using to make sure that our marshes are here and today, tomorrow, and well into the future. So with that, I want to thank everybody for sticking with me for 12 minutes beyond 8 o'clock, but I'm glad to stay on even longer and answer some questions that you may have. So thank you, everyone, and I'm open to questions. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people.
Here.
My goodness, in the chat.
Yeah. So let's start with a comment from Virginia. You want to come on, unmute yourself and make your comment. Virginia Corbier. Okay, I'll read a comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Virginia. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm sorry. I'm working on my phone. I'm with my granddaughter out. Anyway, so I'm very concerned about this restoration project on Route 146 that the Connecticut Department of Transportation has pretty much finalized a plan for. The Connecticut DOT is in part considering climate change as part of one of its issues, but that's not the only issue. They're talking about several kinds of what they call enhancements. And as those of us who know that road know, it's a spectacular stretch between Guilford and Branford. It's also on the historic register for its cultural values. And so there's going to be a meeting next week, Tuesday, the 23rd, and the meeting is in Branford. And I'm hoping that to get some participation that will convince the Connecticut DOT that they need to be extremely careful about those salt marshes. The area includes actually official critical habitat of endangered and threatened species. It also, of course, is salt marsh wetland. And as I say, it's on the historic register. So it's a fragile and fabulous road. And I would love to get as much support as we can for the caution and getting expertise involved in reviewing the plan that the Connecticut Department of Transportation is about to finalize.
Well, thank you for bringing that to my attention, Virginia. I hadn't heard about that that project. You know, and I would say if you can, you know, I can drop my email address in the chat, and if you want to just send me what information you have on it, you know, definitely would be something. I can't 100% guarantee that we'll get involved, but I certainly can take a look at the information and sort of evaluate the situation myself. And then, you know, if it is something that Audubon feels is important enough to get involved in, then we, you know, maybe we will come to the meeting, or you know, or you know, send some sort of a letter or make some sort of contact with DOT. But definitely thank you for bringing it to my attention. I'll drop my email address in the chat, and then just send me what information you have.
Thanks. And, you know, I should have started by saying this talk has really restored my faith. Yeah, I was beginning to despair today in looking over the DOT plans that, you know, well, you know how that can get. So just thank you so much for all of the work that you've done. And of course, Monongahela has done some fabulous, fabulous work. So it warms my heart. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kim, you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions?
Hi, can you hear me?
I
Yes.
can.
I was wondering if there were any other incentives. Quite often property owners don't want to sell. So are there tax breaks, insurance, anything that you can do to become kind of borrow or lease the land, the Saltmarsh land?
You know, I also, so I know one thing I'll sort of say is that after this effort to sort of try to protect marsh migration areas at East River Marsh, there was a sort of secondary effort that was led by Kevin O'Brien, who's now with the Connecticut NER, to, you know, just understand what are the other mechanisms that we might use to protect marsh migration areas, and also just to protect marshes in general. There was quite a few meetings that I participated in where we sort of brainstormed, you know, about additional strategies, got input from other states. You know, the state of New York actually has some pretty good sort of wetland and sort of wetland boundary and sort of protections in place. And I think the hope was that maybe some of those regulations that New York has could be put in place in Connecticut. But so that information was all put into a report. And we have that report, you know, the state of Connecticut still has that report. And I think that it's, you know, the solutions, you know, some of the sort of other solutions are sort of policy solutions where, you know, the state of Connecticut or local municipalities might be able to sort of, you know, either come up with some other incentives to protect marsh migration areas, or, you know, maybe, you know, as marshes are rising, sort of saying, okay, if you're in this area, you know, we just need you to be aware you cannot develop this area. So there was a lot of good brainstorming. Off the top of my head, I can't remember all the details, but there was this effort to really come up with other ideas that we might be able to protect marsh migration areas. Definitely it's something that there was a lot of sort of policy solutions to it. Good question. I wish I could remember more.
Excuse me, this is Virginia again, if I can butt in. I just want to mention that as part of the Biden infrastructure, billions of dollars that are being spent on climate change resilience, there are some grants, the flood mitigation grant, and maybe even part of the infrastructure grant that might be more resources for climate change restorations. So that's another possibility.
Good to know. Thank you.
Jeff Spendlow.
Hi, that was a wonderfully informative presentation. My question was written kind of early on. I think you may have actually answered it when you did some more talking. It had to do whether or not you had a problem with invasive plants coming in at the Great Meadows restoration area.
Yeah, so you know, a good amount of the work at Great Meadows has been targeting sort of the removal of invasive plants, and there's sort of two ways that has been done. One of them was, you know, because Great Meadows was filled in and we were trying to remove sediment to sort of bring the elevation down to sort of, the high end of what would be salt marsh. We removed the top 6 inches of soil from most of the site. And in doing that, we removed a lot of the Phragmites roots, a lot of the Phragmites seed. As I mentioned, there was 6,000 tons of sort of Phragmites ridden soil that was removed from the site. But there is still some frag that popped back up, and there was certainly frag in the upland. So over the last 2 years, we've had a contract with All Habitats to basically do management of the frag. And what they've been doing is they'll mow areas where there's frag, and then as that frag is resprouting, they'll go in and very selectively spray it with a herbicide. And that has been effective. The areas where we originally were seeing frag sort of coming back onto the site, we've been able to get control of those areas. And now that we have the frag pretty much under control, we're doing an additional round of planting in those areas with native plants to take the place of those invasives.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Marie Landry, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. My question was about how you control the Phragmites. So that question was answered, and thank you for a great talk.
You're welcome. One other thing I'll just sort of say about frag is not tolerant to large amounts of salt water. So, by reducing the elevation at Great Meadows and allowing for, more natural ebb and flow of salt water in and out of the site, that in itself is another thing that has been done to sort of basically help keep the Phragmites at bay.
Thanks. William Chapin. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question? All right, I'll ask it. Should existing ditches in wetlands be allowed to fill in, or should they be kept open?
That's a great question. I wish Roger Wolf from the Wetland Habitat and Mosquito Management Program was here to answer that question, but I think it's a little bit of both. Might be how he would answer it. We don't need as many mosquito ditches as there are in our marshes right now. So the fact that some of them are naturally sort of filling in is great. But at the same time, in some of these marshes, there were historically tidal creeks. And, in areas that were heavily ditched, the ditches kind of took the place of those tidal creeks. One thing we are toying with as we sort of think about the restoration at Hammonasset, and we are at the very, very beginning stages. There's a lot of data analysis and assessment to be done, but one thing might be to sort of take a few ditches and try to make more of a sinuous sort of channel, using by connecting a couple of the ditches together and trying to create something that is more reminiscent of a tidal creek from some of the remaining mosquito ditches at Hammonasset. So again, that's very just a preliminary idea. I wouldn't even put it on paper just yet, but where the marsh is naturally sort of recovering and the ditches are filling in, that's awesome. But we also in some places where there were tidal creeks that aren't anymore, some effort to restore those tidal creeks might be necessary too.
Thanks. And Lori Reynolds.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Corey. I was just wondering how much you've been involving the Friends of Hammonasset, as well as the park staff, and not only about invasives, but what else the park staff can do to support the bird life there.
So great question. So we have, we've been, the work that we are doing to sort of engage the teachers and field trips at the park and the Saltmarsh Days that will be taking place this summer is 100% in partnership with the Meigs Point Nature Center. So we've had a lot of conversations with Ranger Rust, and I think that he is kind of keeping the Friends of Hammonasset sort of aware of this project. But that's makes a good point. We might want to reach out to them as well, just to have a sort of direct line of communication. And then also we have been working to keep the park staff as well informed on the project, mostly at the higher levels. So, working with Tom Tyler, who's the director of state parks for all of Connecticut, working with I think it's Bill, who's the manager for Hammonasset, Bill Mattioli. So keeping him well aware of this project and the work that we're doing, you know, and the hope. And we've also been in touch with DOT. There is plans to repave the roads at Hammonasset in the not too distant future. So there's a guy named Dave Cooley who's from DOT who's going to be taking the lead on that project. And he is very excited about the idea of coordinating when it comes to the culverts. So we're definitely keeping him well aware of what's going on and the work that we are going to be doing, you know, that we are doing, you know, working with an engineering firm to sort of just make sure that this is as a coordinated project. You know, we don't want to do something, you know, without the park having that opportunity to sort of weigh in. Another thing that we are doing is we're working with Audubon science team to sort of develop maps that really will show the impacts of sea level rise and, you know, major storm events on the park. You know, where are the areas where the marsh might migrate? Where are the areas where, you know, the flooding in the future is going to be really maybe be a problem for recreational aspects of the park? And then work with Bill, work with Dave, you know, to sort of help the park plan for these sort of future sea level rise scenarios so that, you know, Hammonasset can be a resource, you know, an ecological resource well into the future, but that it can continue to be a recreational resource as well.
I think that's great. I would suggest presenting to Friends of Hammonasset and not, it may not trickle down to those. And I would suggest you reach out to Mickey Kamara.
Okay.
I'll text you her information. I'll email you her information because she's very involved there, and she's also looking out for the interest of Hammonasset. That was her Atlas block, and she's on the board at COA, and
Okay.
she discusses a lot about the efforts at Hammonasset. And I also would still think about, especially during the summer, when there are workers there, I would actually get down to the level of the different workers and not just their supervisors to for them to have a better understanding of why we like puddles in the nature center parking lot and things like that. Thank you. I look forward to more birds there because of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lori.
Thanks, Lori. Anybody else have a question? I guess not. All right, so next week, landscaping for birds with This Place is for the Birds. Sign up for the Zoom link on the website. And Corrie, thank you so much for this evening. It was fabulous. And stay safe, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Dennis. Everybody have a good night.